Good evening, everyone. We are on the second part of Tanya, chapter 8. At the end of the first part of Tanya, of Likutei Amarim. Oh no, sorry, at the end of the whole Tanya. Pardon me, at the end of Kuntras Achron, which we do right before Yitzis Kislev, and everyone understands. Everyone understands exactly what it says in Kuntras Achron. So at the very, very end, the Alter Rebbe says Gewalt, Gewalt. You remember that? It says right at the end of the Tanya, the last page or two, the Alter Rebbe says Gewalt, Gewalt. Right? You can go see what he's talking about there, but the bottom line is that Chassidim always said that the Alter Rebbe by the end is saying to you, look at you, you studied the whole Tanya, and look what you look like still. Gewalt, Gewalt, right? That's the lesson from the end of the Tanya. You studied the whole book, right? So we're not ready for our Gewalt, Gewalt and Shaar HaYichud Ve'emunah. We're only on chapter 8. We have 4 chapters to straighten up our act, right? We have 4 chapters to pull ourselves together. But tonight, God willing, we're going to finish chapter 8, so it'll only be 3. God willing. Chapter 8 is short and sweet. We come out of chapter 7. The end of chapter 7, what were we talking about? We were talking about the way that the world that God does not change from creating the universe. The universe does not change God, right? We explained this in great depth, and with great complexity we explained it because we explained that it's the non-literal tzimtzum, right? And the God's presence is everywhere, just as it is before the creation, because God is everywhere and within everything inherently, and not on the terms of the things He's within them, right? The whole story. There's 2 different expressions of Hashem. There's Sevev Kol Amin and Memale Kol Amin. There's the light that surrounds the world, that is infinite and inherently within everything. There's the light that is within the world, that's within everything and creates everything on their own terms. But really, these 2 things are one thing, right? Really, the Memale is Sevev and the Sevev is Memale. The 2 things are really one thing, and the creation of the world does not change Hashem or His knowledge, we mentioned in the previous chapter, at all. In chapter 8, we go more into this detail, into the idea of Hashem's knowledge, because we want to explain a different detail. We want to explain not the way that the world is nothing additional to Hashem, which is one aspect of Achdus Hashem, of the unity of God, that we discussed for the first 7 chapters. The way that Hashem is one, because Ein Eid Milvade, because there is no Eid, there is no secondary existence in addition to Hashem. Really, only Hashem's existence is the real existence, and everything else is nothing within Hashem, is nothing within godliness. This we explained for 7 chapters. Now we are explaining a different level, a different aspect of Achdus Hashem, of the divine unity, which is the divine pshitus, the divine simplicity, the way God is one, not in the sense that there's nothing else, but in the sense that He has no parts or aspects. He is completely simple. He's not murkav. He's not complex or compound of many parts or many aspects. God is absolutely simple. And we used what we said in the last chapter as a springboard to teach this idea, because the reason why His knowledge does not change when He creates the world is because He and His knowledge are absolutely one. His knowledge is not a trait in addition to Him, but rather, in the words of the Rambam, right? Hu ha-yodeya, hu ha-yadua, v'hu ha-mada, or hadas, right? He is the knower, the knowledge, and the known all at once in one being, without any parts. The absolute simplicity of Hashem includes His knowledge. His knowledge is absolutely one with Him. There is no way to distinguish between the 2. Hashem's knowledge is just a different word for Hashem, basically. Chapter 8, we are expanding upon this idea. And the way we're going about it, it's really a chapter 8 and chapter 9 endeavor. As we're going to see, chapter 8 leads directly into chapter 9. And we'll continue the discussion in chapter 9. But the way the Alter Rebbe goes about discussing this is he says that nothing is one quite like Hashem. That's how the Alter Rebbe goes about it. We are going to compare Hashem's unity with the unity of other things. Because, as we started explaining last class, the human being, the human soul, has many different faculties. There's many different things that the soul has. Among them, most importantly for our purposes, are chachma, which is wisdom, and ratzon, which is will. We spoke last time about ratzon most of all. But in the human soul, all of these different things are in addition to the soul. The soul is murkav. It's not simple. It has various components. It's complex. It has different aspects, different things it has, different things it does. Right? Synthesis. The soul does not have the same simplicity as Hashem does. And the Alter Rebbe says his conclusion up front, before he's going to explain at length how this works, he says that Hashem is not similar to us in any way. Essentially, Hashem, basically all of Hashem's traits that we ascribe to him are different than how those traits are in us, because he is one with all of his traits, his will, his wisdom, etc. We are not one with our traits. And therefore, not only can we not understand him, but we also cannot understand his traits, nor how he is one with his traits. So there's really three things we don't understand. We don't understand Hashem. We don't understand Hashem's ratzon or Hashem's chachma. And we don't understand the nature of the unity between Hashem and Hashem's chachma, Hashem and Hashem's wisdom. There's really three things we don't understand, and those three things are really all different facets of the same point that we don't understand, because Hashem and his wisdom are absolutely one. But the point is that the way they're absolutely one is itself unfathomable to us. We can't understand it because his wisdom doesn't work like our wisdom. That was the last thing we said last week. We said that when a human being understands something, right? When we understand a certain trait or a certain aspect, we understand it the way it is in us, right? All of our understanding is by analogy, right? So I say, I'm smart, but Hashem, I can understand, is infinitely smart. He's infinitely more than my wisdom, right? But the Alter Rebbe is coming and saying, even this itself is to make Hashem too low. We don't understand him, even for the purposes of comparison. His wisdom is not just a bigger version of our wisdom. His wisdom is truly incomparable. Why? Why must it be that way? Because his wisdom is totally one with him. Right? So just as you cannot understand God's very self, his very essence, his very being, you can't understand him by analogy. You can't just say he's like me but bigger, right? He is totally incomprehensible and beyond me. So too, his wisdom is totally beyond my wisdom. His will is totally beyond my will. Truly incomprehensible. So this is what the Alter Rebbe is now going to explain a little bit with a little bit more expansion, a little bit more length. He's going to spend the rest of chapter 8 discussing how the highest faculty in a human being, the highest thing our soul has, is chachma, is wisdom. Then in chapter 9, he's going to explain how Hashem totally transcends chachma, how Hashem is totally beyond our chachma. And then in chapter 9, we are going to conclude that therefore, his chachma, and the way he and his chachma are united is beyond our understanding. That's going to be the Seder HaDvarim. That's the order that the Alter Rebbe is going to go in. So without further ado, the rest of chapter 8 is all about chachma as it is in the human being. We're going to explain what chachma is as the highest faculty. We're going to explain why it's the highest faculty in order to set us up for chapter 9, where we're going to explain how Hashem is far and away above and removed from what we are calling chachma. All right? We are on page 945 in the English, Ki hamayla v'hamadrega harishona in the Hebrew. Bottom of page 945. Says the Holy Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe says, Ki hamayla v'hamadrega harishona etzla nivroe mi'achachma. The first, the highest quality and level Etzel HaNivraim in the creation, Hi HaChachma, is wisdom. Shelechein nikreis reishis. That's why Chachma is called reishis, the first. Reishis Chachma, right? Very famous phrase, right? Reishis Chachma. Chachma is the first. Generally speaking, within creations, their highest level, the highest thing that you could call the creation itself, is its Chachma, right? That's the highest faculty that's distinguishable in a creation. Over on page 946 at the top. Chachma is the beginning and the source of all the life force, all the vitality in the creation. Because from wisdom comes understanding and knowledge. Right? These are the three intellectual faculties, the three intellectual spheres, the three intellectual faculties within the human being. Right? Very briefly, the mind, as understood by Chassidus, has three fundamentally different stages, three fundamentally different functions. Now, each one of these three has many, many, many details and different levels and different ways they interact with each other. In other words, it's very complex, but the bottom line is that these three things cannot be reduced one to the other. In other words, no amount of bina will ever be a chachma. No amount of das will ever be a bina, etc., etc. None of them are. They are essentially different functions. In fact, in some ways, they are opposite functions. Right? The mind can really do three things, and they are three totally distinct things.
Like different, not even related between each other?
No, they are definitely related to each other.
Bina is because of the chokhmah, or Bina is unique, like independent?
It's both. It's both.
Because of the chokhmah?
The chokhmah teaches Bina. Bina comes from chokhmah. It's the
Right.
order of the spheres. No, the spheres always go in order. Bina
But
comes
is it
from
like a
chokhmah,
cascade?
das comes from Bina.
It's like a cascade
It is like a cascade, but it's a cascade of discrete steps. It's both, right? It's a wave and a particle, right? As we'd say in physics, right? They give to each other, but they are also irreducible. Chachma is not Bina, right? Even though Chachma causes Bina and influences Bina, and Bina comes from Chachma, etc., right? So there is a cascade, but they're also distinct. In fact, we are going to, I'll ruin the ending of chapter 8 right now. We are going to say that all of these things are incommensurately higher than the next one. In other words, there's a be'en arech, there is an infinite gap between each of these things and the next thing. Right? These things are really distinct one from each other. The relationship between Chachma and Bina, even though Chachma gives birth to Bina, even though Chachma influences and in a sense creates Bina, causes Bina, on the other hand, the relationship between Bina and Chachma is also like one of Yesh Ma'ayin, is also like one of something from nothing. Right? They are truly distinct, truly separate. And when you understand what they are, it's easy to see why. Because Chachma, what we call wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, I don't know what you're meant to get from the English translations exactly, but the Chachma is essentially the existence of something else within the realm of the soul. The existence of something else within the realm of the soul, right? There is an idea here, right? You see the light. I see the light of the idea. The idea is there, right? So the idea is present, and it's present to me. In other words, I see the idea. Chachma is compared to sight always, re'iyah, right? Sight, I see the idea, but I am not involved in the idea in any way. The idea is pure, in other words. The idea is somehow in my knowledge, in my experience, I should say. However, my experience of it does not have me changing it or affecting it in any way, right? I am purely, in a sense, Chachma, I am purely a receiver, like when you see something, right? I am purely a receiver of that truth, right? And that is why Chachma is the highest of the koiches pnimiyim, of the internal faculties of that the soul has. Chachma is the highest, because Chachma is the only faculty which lets me relate to something higher than me without bringing it down to my level. right? Without ruining it, in a sense.
It's like a concept.
Yeah, I have a relationship with it, but my relationship doesn't ruin it. The relationship is not a relationship where it's redefined in my terms. I am within its light. The idea is there, and I'm here. I see the idea is there. I see the reality of the idea. In fact, Chachma is associated with the most profound hisamtus, it's called. The most profound sense of veracity. The seeing is believing. Right. In other words, when I grasp something with my chachma, when I have that light, it's impossible to convince the person otherwise. Right. You can't argue someone out of chachma. You can argue someone out of bina. You can't argue someone out of chachma because chachma is the idea is directly apprehensible to my mind. Right. And I see it in front of my face. You can't convince me what I'm seeing in front of my face isn't there. Right.
Fata Morgana.
It's that I see it in front of my face, but with my mind. Yeah. Bina is almost the opposite. Bina is where the idea is brought into my mind, and my mind and the idea become one. The idea is integrated into my mind, right? This is called ruining the idea, right? On the other hand, it's also called understanding the idea.
But is it
right?
the same idea that you got in Chokhmah?
The same idea you get in Chachma, that's the way it works. Okay. Chachma is the idea as it comes to you, right? The barak hamavrik, the flash of insight. Okay. Bina, so Chachma makes the connection. Chachma means that me and the idea exist in the same universe, so to speak. But I haven't yet brought it in. I haven't taken ownership of it. Bina is my ownership of the idea. Bina is very involved. Bina is the bringing of the idea in from Chachma, taking the idea apart, putting it back together again, analysis. You get into it. You get into all of its details. You get into all the different things about this idea, right? Bina is the problem with Bina, so to speak, why it's lower than Chachma, is because the idea is not there as purely. You don't have that veracity, right? Veracity, the hisamtus, hitamtut. You don't have the seeing is believing effect. Bina is compared to shmiya, to hearing, not to seeing. Right? In a way, hearing is better because when you hear it, you own it on your own terms rather than seeing it, right? Seeing it, the thing is over there and I get to see it, right? Hearing it, where does the idea exist in a real sense? In my own head, right? It becomes mine. Ownership, truly understanding it. In a way, Chachma is not truly understanding it. Chachma is a closer relationship than Bina, but it's not a relationship of understanding. It doesn't become part of me. Right? It's an incredibly real thing, but it doesn't become part of me in the same way that it becomes part of Bina. Bina, literally, the idea and my mind literally become one. Right? The idea and my way of thinking literally become interwoven with each other in an inner way. In Chachma, it's in my mind. The light of the idea is in my mind. I see the idea, but it doesn't become part of my being the way it does with Bina.
So Bina is more like practical. Like when you say something in Chokhmah, it's just like you got a blink of something, you don't even know what it is. Now you digest it a little bit.
It allows it to be practical. Yes, I agree. It allows it to be practical. It's what takes the idea and eventually, at a much later stage, allows it to be so to speak, put into practice, I suppose. But you should notice that the very fact that the idea can be put into practice is, in a sense, a decrease in the idea. It's a decrease in the presence of the idea. I'm already working on the idea. I'm using the idea for something, right? That's already a sign of my involvement. The idea is ruined. It's not pure anymore. The purest idea in its purest form is in Chachma, where the idea is here and I get out of the way, right? That's why Chachma is always associated with Bittul and Bina with Yeshus. Chachma is associated with a sense of self-abnegation, of nothingness, right? The idea is here. I'm not here. The idea is here. Bina is hands-on. I'm here. I'm involved, right? It's now we have to get involved, right? It's not a bad thing. It's just a different thing. We have to get involved to become part of that idea, right? Which is in Kedusha and holy things, that's the ultimate goal, right? Is to make that part of our reality.
So Chokhmah is more objective and Bina is more subjective.
Everything lower is in a sense less objective, in a sense.
But even Chokhmah, if you and I see the same idea, when you see it in its purest, do
Yes.
we both see the exact same thing?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's like the eureka. Wow, I don't know.
I know what it is, but the question is if you see the eureka and I see if you see the exact same thing.
Depends on the thought.
I think so. I think so.
Yeah.
I think if it is the same thing,
And
if it is the same muskal, if it's the same muskal, I think so.
I doubt it because each one has its own chokhmah. It's not
That's
like
bina.
this.
That's bina.
No. Each one has his own chachma as well. You're right. But the he's saying in the absolute purest form, maybe.
But, I mean, not all of us can reach that level. So I mean,
No, but there's no distinction. We're not talking about levels to reach. These are 10 things that everyone has, right? You're born with them. It's like saying not everyone reaches the level of having a right arm, right? This is
not
what
only
everyone
that, but
has.
This is a compliment. You think of like much higher things because your knowledge is by far higher than what we can.
No, but this isn't things that you know. This isn't knowledge.
You're not really using your brain.
When you involve your knowledge already, it's bina.
No.
Chachma is not knowledge.
When you know things, then your mind is open to things that I mean, other people do not even think
No,
of.
sure.
because they're not aware of.
Learning refines your mind for sure.
Yes.
For sure, learning refines your mind. That's not what he's saying, though. What Ronnie's saying is that if we both have the level where we can access the same chachma, is it this exact same thing that we're accessing? And I'm telling him that I think in the purest form it is. I think it is.
Like a physician,
Yeah.
which is like expert in physics, may have things in mind that I would
Nachon.
not think of because I mean I'm not even in that field. I mean, it's
Nachon.
like-
But the nevertheless, if you're not bringing in the physician, right? If you're talking about very simple things like 2 + 2 = 4, right? Ronnie's saying is, does everyone have their own 2 + 2 = 4 be'etzem, or do we share a 2 + 2 = 4? And I'm saying that in the highest levels of Chachma, certainly I think it's true that at some point we say we all share the same 2 + 2 = 4.
if you know that 2 and 2 is 4, but some people do not even know.
That's
2.
fine. That's fine. We're not
You don't
arguing.
know to, I mean,
We're not
you-
arguing with that. We're not arguing with that. And then you have das. Das is the third intellectual faculty, which is the most different of the three. Das has almost nothing to do, in a sense, with Chachma and Bina. Das is the go-between. It's what allows Bina to create the midos, to create the emotions. Das is his kashrus. Das is connection. Chachma sees the idea. Bina, the idea, I make the idea part of my mind. Das is that my mind, the idea as it is in my mind, has to do with me.
So this is the product.
Internalization of the idea. Internalization. This idea is real in my world, right? Chachma and Bina, the idea, it's all still, what's the word? It's all still abstract. Chachma and Bina are work at levels of abstraction, right? Das is, this thing is real in my world. It's as real as I am. That's das.
I see
right?
that as really the product of the two. That's the outcome.
In a sense, yeah.
If you internalize.
This is the very, very, this is the very, very brief summary of what the three things are. There's much more, obviously. There's much more. We can spend a very, very long time discussing just these three faculties. So the Alter Rebbe continues. So keep in mind, this whole thing that we're going to discuss, we're going into lots of other levels as well. What the Alter Rebbe is trying to talk about is he's trying to show that Chachma is the highest in the soul, and everything that comes after Chachma is really rooted in Chachma. Chachma gives you Bina, Bina gives you Das, Das gives you Midos, right, and so on and so on and so on. It all comes from Chachma. Chachma is the beginning point of our existence. It's the beginning point of the inner life of a human being, right? Continues the Alter Rebbe, Umehen nimshaches, kol hamidos shebenefesh hamaskelas. From Bina and Das come all of the emotive traits, the emotions, the emotive attributes in the rational soul, kamei ava v'chesed v'rachamim v'chayotze b'zeh, like love and kindness and mercy and the like. We know that there are 6 emotional faculties in the soul: Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. As usual in Tanya, when the Alter Rebbe describes it, the main ones are Chesed, Gvura, and sometimes Tiferes. You have kindness, you have discipline or severity, and you have Tiferes, beauty, mercy, also a trait of Tiferes, right?
Yeah.
So the intellect, how do you get emotions from intellect, right? Here's a good place where you can see both ideas, by the way, that each level exists on its own, but where does it get its life from? Also from the previous thing, right? How you have both aspects, how you have the cascade of discrete things, right? On the one hand, as we all know, emotions exist on their own without intellect, unfortunately, right? Everyone has experiences, usually, of emotions that are uncontrolled or uncreated by intellect. On the other hand, we are saying that from das comes the emotions. How is this the case? Because even though we have emotions even without das, the inner life force of all emotions comes from das. We're going to see this again in this chapter. Even though it's possible to have emotions without an intellect that is controlling them or generating them, nevertheless, where do the emotions come from? What is at the essence of the emotions is the aspect of das, is the aspect of the trait of connection, right? In other words, the intellect educates our emotions. The intellect educates the emotions. Me'ach shalit al halev.
Should.
Does, is what we're saying. The mind rules over the emotions. It's not aspirational, by the way. Common misconception. When the Alter Rebbe speaks in Tanya of the mind ruling over the emotions, it's not something to achieve. He is stating a fact. The mind rule over the emotions. It's how it is. Right? So we see that we have many emotions that don't seem to be ruled over by the mind, and that's exactly what I'm explaining. The reason we see many emotions that aren't ruled over by the mind is because we don't, the relationship of the emotions to the mind is in two ways. There is an explicit education of the emotions by the mind, and there is also the essence of all emotions which come from the mind. In other words, again, the das is a recognition that something other than me exists, right? Something else is real. The emotions are how the soul deals with things other than me that are real, right? So even when I seem to have emotions uninformed by intellect, that's really not true, because at the essence of all emotions is das. You don't feel emotions for something that you have not brought into your world, that is not real to you. You don't feel emotions. The very fact that you feel an emotion for it shows you that the essence of this emotion is das. What's the problem? The problem is that sometimes that das is itself uninformed, that das doesn't have a connection to bina, doesn't have a connection to chachma, but the emotions always come from intellect. Me'ach shalit ala lev. The way to control the emotions is through the intellect, because all emotions are born from intellect. What is real to me and what is not real to me. Right? And before I decide what's real and not real, which is in das, I have to first understand what things are, which is bina. And I have to understand that things are, which is chachma. Right? The intellect forms the basis for all emotions. Right? And it's in what's called in Chassidus a hislavshus pnimi, which means that the intellect does not move the emotions like I move my keys across the table, right? Where I am one thing, the keys are another thing, and I can impart upon them some sort of change from the outside, right? It's not a change from the outside. The intellect changes the emotions from the inside. They change the emotions by becoming the emotions. Because the essence of the emotion is the way the thing is real to me, therefore, by changing the way the thing is to me, which also involves understanding what the thing is, which is the Chochmah and Bina aspect, right? By changing how the thing is real to me, I can change my relationship to the thing, right? Which is why the correct word, I think, in English is that the intellect educates the emotions. Education is a hislavshus pnimi. A teacher doesn't teach a student to do something by literally pushing them, right? You don't teach someone how to write by pushing their hand to write. You teach them with a islavshus pnimi. I'm giving them something that transforms what they are from the inside. That is education, right? The mind educates the heart, which is why many people, just as an aside, which is why many people misread the first part of the Tanya to terrible effect, right? The idea that the mind rules over the emotions leads people to think that my mind rules over my emotions in each and every moment by brute force. Right? People think the mind rules over the emotions like I move my keys across the table, right? So I'm getting angry now, but if I just tell myself with my mind not to get angry, I won't get angry, right? Which almost never works, right? That's not how it works. The emotions are much stronger than the mind, right? What's the metaphor? The metaphor given in Chassidus is it's like a small child taming a powerful and dangerous animal, right? It's like a child training an elephant. Right? So if the child just tries to move the elephant around, the elephant will crush it into a bloody mess. Right? The only advantage the small child has over the emotions is that the child is smart. And the emotions are stupid. Right? Which is why Moyach Shalet Al Alev, which is why a human child can train an adult elephant. Right? Because if you stop trying to move it in a brute force way and instead educate it from the inside, you can change your emotions. So to not be angry in the way of Tanya is not to sit there when you're angry and try and convince yourself not to be angry. The way to not be angry is to live a more godly life, to have a more godly mind, to perceive things from a more divine perspective, and then automatically, right, your anger will slowly be improved. It's very hard to change midas. It's very hard to change the heart, but you can slowly, through a process of education, right, you can slowly change it. Yeah, the famous story, you know the story of the Alter Rebbe's spy on Napoleon's staff. You know this story? Yes? Famous story that the Alter Rebbe had a certain chassid who spied on Napoleon and was part of Napoleon's court. And Napoleon suspected him, so he accused him. He put his hand on his heart, and he accused him, right, that you're the spy, right? And the chassid said that it's only because the Alter Rebbe taught me that Me'ach Shalet Al Alev that I was able to remain calm, and my heart didn't give me away, right? So there's a right way and a wrong way to read the story. The wrong way to read the story is that he went into some sort of Zen meditative state right then. He told himself must be calm, and his heart rate didn't increase, right? Which is the totally wrong way to read the story. The correct way to read the story is that the Alter Rebbe had taught him that if he just involves himself in Elokus and he understands that Napoleon can't do anything to him without God's permission, right? What is there anything to be afraid of? And that idea was so profound in his das, that idea, that derher, that godly realization was so profound, that feeling was so profound and so true to him that it affected even his emotions, and he actually wasn't afraid of Napoleon, right? It's the right way and the wrong way. Anyway, so the mind, you have Chochma Bina Das, but with his lavshus pnimi, in an inner change, educates the emotions and forms the basis for all emotion. Ukanira b'chush, this will help us understand the next thing the Alter Rebbe says, which is interesting. Ukanira b'chush, as we see with our own eyes, says the Alter Rebbe, shehakatan she'en b'y das hu bekas tamid v'achzari, that a child who does not have das is always angry and cruel. V'gam ahavasai hi ledvarim katanim she'en ro'i la'avam. And also, his love is for small things which do not deserve to be loved. Because he does not have the das, he does not have the knowledge, the connection to love things which are deserving of love, because love follows das, right? The Alter Rebbe says, where do we see in our practical experience, what's the obvious example of how das, what's real to a person, changes what they love or what they hate? He says, compare a small child to an adult, right? A bar mitzvah in halacha is called a bar das, right? Which halachically means he's responsible for his actions, right? But if you think about it, das, in our understanding, as we've been explaining it in Chassidus, has really the same definition. It makes perfect sense. Why is a bar mitzvah called a bar das? Because he has maturity. He's responsible for his actions. But what does maturity to be responsible for your actions mean? It means you realize that things other than you are real. That's what it means. That's what maturity is, right? It's a certain departure from self-centeredness that children have. Children have a certain innate self-centeredness because their das is not developed. They have a very weak das. So the reality of things other than them, to them, is limited. And what are the things that are real to them? Small and childish things. Kafi hadas, according to their das, right? Children love candy, right? Children love sweet things, simple things. It's all according to their das, right? So too, children are very easily irritated. They're also very cruel because they don't have the same amount of empathy, despite what the modern propaganda about children being absolutely perfect and much better than adults. Despite all of that, children are very cruel. They don't have the same type of empathy that an adult has. Generally speaking, children are, as the saying goes, children are not good, but they are innocent. That's the difference. Children are innocent. That's what people really like about children, is that a child is innocent because he's not responsible, right? He's not responsible for his actions, so all the bad things about him don't matter, right? But if you actually sit and objectively evaluate, does a child have a good character? The answer is no. They're not a full human. Their das is not developed. They're not a full human being yet, right? Essentially. Their das, their empathy for others, the ability for others to be real to them in their world is extremely limited. Right? That's why they love childish things. They hate childish things. In general, they have a lack of connection. Their connection is not developed yet. Sorry? I'm okay, thank you. Okay, so that's the emotions, right? Moving right along. What comes after the emotions? Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Netzach, Yesod. You have Malchus. Malchus is the where the emotions go forth into action, right? Actions, also known as the Levushei HaNefesh, the soul actions, the garments of the soul, are really divided into three. You have Machshava, Dibur, Umaisa. Thought, speech, and action. We're going to go through them in order. Says the Alter Rebbe. From the emotions of the soul, words and letters of thought issue forth. Right? You have machshava. Machshava is caused by emotions. And similarly, just as it's hard on the surface to see how emotions must have intellect as their basis, so too with thought having emotions as their basis, right? You might think that I sit and I think, if I'm a math professor and I sit and I think about math all day, right? How is the middah, how is love, for example, the basis of the essence of all of my thoughts on math? But the truth is that just as the intellect educates the emotions educate the thoughts. The essence of every thought is emotion, either on the Ava side, the love, drawing closer to something, or the Gvura side, the discipline, the pushing away, the moving away from things. As Alter Rebbe continues, "Hanefesh machsheves bedavar she'ohavas." I think. Sheheves, of course. I should have taken that second T. Or how to perform deeds of kindness and mercy. The soul thinks of what it loves, or how to perform deeds of kindness and mercy. So you see, there's two types of things. Either the soul thinks about what it loves, right? Similar to how we had the das relating to love, right? When das related to love, there was two ways. Either the love clearly expresses the das, right? In which case the mind was successfully educating the emotions. Or the love was not in an obvious way, but in an implicit way, expressing das, because das is what's real to me, right? So too in thought. Thought expresses love, either or chesed or gvura, love or discipline / hate, or whatever, however you want to put it. Expresses it in two ways. Either, says the Alter Rebbe, it expresses what you love explicitly, right? You think about how much you love this thing, right? Or, what was the second category? How to bring about, how to act on your love and your discipline, right? Your love and your hate, your love and your fear, right? In other words, even when the thought does not seem to be directly connected to emotions, the emotions form the essence of it. Because think about it like this. Until you get to Malchus, we're really talking about things that the soul is, not things that the soul does. Right? The soul is made up of loves and fears and understandings and knowledges and wisdoms. Right? These are not active, right? If you want to use a computer metaphor, which I think computer metaphors there's too many of them, so I use it with regrets, because I don't think the soul is really comparable to a computer, and I think that the metaphors give people the wrong idea. However, with all of that said, if you wanted to compare, you could say it's the difference between firmware and active software. Right? The firmware is the software which determines how this thing behaves in everything that it does, right?
Operating system.
Operating system, exactly, same idea. It's the operating system. It determines, I haven't done anything, right? The operating system determines how I will do what I do. The actual executing actions, right, is machshava dibur u'maaseh, thought, speech, and action. So the only reason why we would ever execute an action, right? The only reason why we would ever actually think about something, right, is if we want to enact either our attraction towards something or our repulsion away from it. So go back to the math professor. The math professor, when he thinks about math, really there must be a love or a fear within this somewhere. Right? Because if there is no love and no fear, if there's nothing drawing me out of myself or pushing me away from something outside of myself, there is never any reason to act. I would essentially be at rest in a spiritual sense. Right? I would have everything that I need. I would be in a position of, so to speak, comfort, sort of metaphysical, spiritual comfort. Right? There's no reason to make myself uncomfortable, but I don't need anything, I don't want anything, there's no reason to do anything. Right? All actions in thought, speech, and physical action comes from love and fear. The love and the fear are the thought, speech, and action are the means by which I act on my love and fear. Right? I'm thinking about going on vacation to Portugal. Right? So if I'm thinking of going on vacation to Portugal, right, the only reason I'm thinking about this is because I had a chachma of what Portugal was, and I had a bina of what Portugal was, and I had a das of what Portugal was, and I had an ava of what Portugal was, and now I'm thinking about Portugal, right? Therefore, it makes sense to think about Portugal. That's what brings me to think about Portugal. Yep.
That's what I meant. Imagine you don't even know Portugal exists.
Right.
It will never come into your mind.
So too, if it only exists as an abstraction to you, right? It's not real to me. It doesn't exist within my realm. There's no love or fear, right? And the truth is, you could say, so you could make it more complicated, because you could say the math professor is thinking about things that are totally abstract and have no practical application, right? But then on the other hand, the math professor's job is to think about math, right? Or he has an itch in his soul, right? A passion that can only be scratched by thinking about difficult and abstract things, right? It all comes from either an ava or a yira, right? So machshava at its essence is ava or yira. Just as the mind educates the heart educates machshava, educates thought, right? Machshava behislavshus pnimi. My emotions become my thoughts in their innermost way, and they dictate where my thoughts go. Yes? V'chein b'shar midos. So too with the other emotional traits, right? Not just chachma, not just chesed and gvura, but also all the other emotional traits. Sorry, not just chesed and tiferes, I should say. Ubechol machshava shebe'elam, continues the Alter Rebbe, meluveshes ba eze midah mevia lachshev machshava zu, is enclosed some emotion which brings us to this thought. Umidah zu hi chayusa shamachshava zu. This emotion is the essence, gives life, right, to this thought, which is what I've been saying. When he says give life, he means it educates it, it invests itself in it in an inner way. Continues the Alter Rebbe, 3 lines down on page 947. From speech comes thought, right? V'hein chayusan mamish, and thought.
Thought comes speech, you said.
Sorry, what did I say? I said from speech comes thought?
Yeah.
That's the wrong way to do it. No, from thought comes speech, yes. V'hein chayusan mamish. And thought is the life of speech. Thought educates speech, right? And we have the same question and the same answer again. Sometimes people speak without thinking, right?
It's impossible.
Well, maybe not at the most literal level. No, they're not thinking of what they're saying is maybe a better way of putting it, right? They speak without thinking fully of what they're saying.
Yeah, they put little thought.
Never ends well.
So we have the same question and the same answer, that ideally, if everything is passing through correctly, right, you would speak only what you have thought. But even speech that is not fully inhabited by thought, right? What is it? There is no way to speak without having first thought, right? Speech is inherently a child of thought, even when thought is not overtly expressed in it. Why? Because the 3 levushim, you need this to understand action as well. The 3 garments of the soul, the 3 things the soul does in an active way, thought, speech, and action, right? They descend in order. And the way it works is that thought is my soul acting on itself, right? Within itself. Thinking is the soul acts internally, right? The soul does something within itself. Dibur, right, is the soul is expressing itself outwards, right? Maisa is that really I am just bringing about a result in a totally external reality. In fact, if you think about it, Maisa is the opposite of Chachma. It's like full circle, right? Chachma is only the idea is here and I'm not here. Maisa is only the action is here and I'm not here, right? The external, it's gone all the way through me and now it leaves me. I withdraw. Right? Where is this thing? Where is my expression? It becomes totally separate from me. To the extent that I can do a maisa, right? Like we spoke about back in chapter 2 of Shaar HaYichud ve'emunah, where I can be a silversmith and make a cup, and I can go walking in the shuk, and my maisa stays behind. Right? My maisa stays over here, which we explained means that it's not really a true maisa yesh ma'ayin, because really the potential for the cup is already in the silver. You can go back and review all the early classes. So like this, you cannot have speech without thought, because since speech is my soul expressing itself outward, right? How can I have my soul expressing itself outward in the first step? If you understand what I'm saying. In other words, to get to the point where my soul expresses itself outward, there first has to be the soul expressing itself at all, even inward, right? You can't go directly to outward. Or a different way of putting it is that if you see someone expressing their soul outward, you know that the soul is able to express itself inward, right? Not so different actually from what we said in chapter 3 or 4 of Shaar HaYichud ve'emunah, where we said that if the ray of the sun is here on earth, all the more so it must be within the body of the sun, right? Similar idea. If I see external expression, then there must be internal expression. That's how the essence of dibur is machshava. Even if this dibur seems to be dibur without machshava, right? What do I find if I really dig into dibur? At the essence, I find the soul's expression, and the soul's expression starts in machshava. Yeah, so dibur includes machshava. Machshava is the basis for dibur. V'hadibur, and then the last step, speech brings to performing acts of righteousness and kindness, like a king who commands his servant to give, right? That's speech leading into action. So too when the person does something himself, the power of his soul and its life, which is invested in this action, is as nothing compared to the power and the life which is invested in the person's speech. So now he's getting to his conclusion. So the first step is that speech is what creates action, right? For a very obvious reason. Now this is actually the most tricky. Right, the most tricky of all of these, because you see action all the time that's not preceded by speech. In fact, it seems perfectly reasonable to go from thought to action directly, right, without speaking. But the truth is that the exact same principle we've been saying continues to apply, that the action has at its essence speech, and it must, because thought is the soul expressing itself to itself. Action is totally outside of me. How can my expression to myself ever reach totally outside of me without that middle step connecting me to the outside, right? Which is speech. Speech is the soul to the soul expressing outward. Action is just outward, and machshava, thought, is the soul just to itself. So there must be, right? If I look at Maisa, if I look at someone does an action, right? I move this across the table, right? It must not just be that I can express myself only to myself, right? Because then how could I come to be expressing myself in something totally outside of me, right? There must be an intermediate stage. I know that the soul I'm looking at, moving these keys, can express themselves to others as well. Because otherwise, how am I affecting this, right?
But it doesn't have to go through dibur.
Just like all the other things we've been saying, right? Just like dibur doesn't have to go through machshava, right? Or just like ahava doesn't have to go through bina, right? It does and it doesn't.
How can dibur go without machshava?
What?
How can dibur is not like something which is like can be initiated by itself.
What do you mean?
You need to, if you speak, you need to think of how to speak. I mean, how do you speak?
No, at the very basic level, but that's neither here nor there, right? That's like saying to express love, I have to be awake, for example. In other words, sure, it's a prerequisite, but that's not what we mean. We mean that your thought expresses the same thing that your machshava expresses. Right? In other words, I obviously think how to speak. I need to be a thinking human being to be able to form words, but not necessarily are always the words that I say reflective of the machshava that I think, right? For example. So I can have, in theory, I can have dibur without machshava, right? So too with ava, I can love without truly understanding, right? But the fact is that, as I've said, with all of them, there's two aspects. There's the way things are when they're working ideally, which is that each level fully expresses what's in the previous one. But even without that, even when the thing seems to be working on its own, what is its essence? Its essence is the thing that came before it, right? The essence of Maisa, believe it or not, is dibur. There is no Maisa without dibur. Not the action of speaking, but the level of dibur, the spiritual aspect of dibur must precede action. Because otherwise, until I get to dibur, my soul can only relate to itself. And at Maisa, all of a sudden, my soul is able to fully interact with and change things completely outside of me, right? There has to be an intermediary where the soul is able to express itself outward. So the dibur is kind of like the middle. You have the self and you have the other, and it's sort of like a bridge connecting the two. Right? Machshava is fully self, almost, and Maisa is almost fully other. Dibur is that bridge which connects them. So if I see someone do a Maisa, if I see someone doing something almost totally other, I know that their soul can express itself to the other. I know that there's dibur there. The dibur, the level of dibur, even if not actual speech, forms the essence of the thing, just as we've been saying by all the other levels, right?
Otiyot HaDibur v'otiyot HaMachshava are the same?
No, different. Every level has its own osios, and all the osios are different. It's not for now. It's a whole class in itself. But a good question. What's the last thing Alter Rebbe said here? The last thing Alter Rebbe said on this page was that, and what is the relationship of Maisa to Dibur? It's a relationship of Yesh Me'ayin. Right? Irreducible. You cannot get from Maisa to Dibur. Maisa and Dibur are like two different worlds, right? It's like saying you could speak all day and move the keys, right? It's not how it works, right? It's a totally different aspect it's a totally different level of action, a totally different dimension, right? Totally separate. So this, as I said, with all the other levels, right? On the one hand, the previous level forms the essence of the next level, and you can't have the next level without the previous level. All the next levels imply the previous level. On the other hand, how is the previous level seen in this one? In a way of yesh ma'ayin. The previous level is totally concealed in this level. It's a total break, totally separate. Two totally separate things. So they cause the next thing, but yet are also totally distinct and separate, like I said before, right? The cascade of discrete things, as we said before. And to what extent, he says at the top of page 948, Uke'erach umashal haguf l'neshama. Like a body to a soul is action to speech. That's how separate, that's how profoundly different and separate they are. The kach erech eisias hadibur leisias hamachshava, so to the letters of speech, to the letters of thought. The kach erech eisias hamachshava lemahus hamida melevejas ba mechaya, so to the letters of thought, to the essence of the emotion, which is invested in thought and gives it life. The chen erech mahus v'chayas hamida, so to the essence of the emotion legabe achachim bin avadas shechalusanu aseichel, to chachmen bin andas, which are seichel shememenu nimshacha midazu, from which is drawn this emotion. So in other words, think about what the Alter Rebbe is saying. The Alter Rebbe is saying that what is a human being? We've gone through everything a human being does, basically, right? This is what the soul has. It's the full inventory, right? This is what the soul can do. Is included in everything we've discussed tonight. Everything the soul can do. Everything the soul does, right, is in a hierarchy of sorts. You have the lowest level. The lowest level is totally dependent on the previous level. Maisa needs dibur, right, and is really just a lower expression of dibur. It's dibur expressed in a lower place. So too, dibur is machshava expressed in a lower place, right? And machshava is an emotion expressed in a lower place, and an emotion is a thought, is a seichel, is a muskal expressed in a lower place, right? So everything that the human being can do and is in their internal faculties, everything comes from chachma. Right? You understand what he's saying? He's not just saying that Chachma is the first. He's really saying, in a sense, that Chachma is the whole. Right? If you remove Chachma, nothing that follows Chachma can take place. Right? Everything is included into or branches off of Chachma. It's like the trunk of the tree. Right? Without the trunk, you can't have branches on branches on branches on branches, right? Everything branches off and is born from Chachma, which again, remember, is that this other thing exists in my universe, right? That's what Chachma is. Chachma is this thing that is there exists to me, and I see it. I can see it, I'm in its light, right? Its light shines upon me. Yeah? That's Chachma. Without Chachma, this whole process doesn't even begin, right? And we don't mean why. I think maybe one of the reasons, this is my own idea, but I think it makes sense to me at least, which isn't saying much. But the reason why the Alter Rebbe goes through all of these levels, right, is to show you that Chachma is essential, even when it seems that Chachma plays no role in any of these things, right? That's why he went through this in the way that he did. The essence of Bina is Chachma, even when Bina seems to not be based on Chachma, right? Bina, because, right, that's the part of the subtlety of what he's saying here, that they're yesh ma'ayin one from the other. In other words, because there's something from nothing, that means Bina is a something that stands on its own, right? It's not, in other words, what he's saying is, it's not like a obvious causative process, right? It's not like I push the cup which pushes the keys, and the keys wouldn't move if I wasn't here, because the cup is just being used to move them. Each one of these things stands on their own. There's my hand, there's the cup, and there's the keys, right? They each exist. They move on their own, so to speak. Not like this example, right? The keys are their own thing that seem to sometimes be able to work independently. The cup is its own thing which seems to sometimes work independently, right? You have love which seems to work independent of bina, and you have bina which seems to work independent of chachma, and I have actions which seem to work independent of speech, right? But what the Alter Rebbe is saying here is that really that's all only in the external expression. In the internal way that the soul works, in the essence of each one of these things, you have the thing that's above it. So when we say that if there was no chachma, you would have none of these things, we mean it in the profounder sense, right? We mean it in the deeper sense. Not if I don't engage in chachma, then I can't engage in bina, because sometimes you have love that doesn't seem to be based on engaging chachma at all, right? Or you have thoughts that don't seem to be based on having love at all, right? We are saying that you wouldn't be able to have bina without chachma. You wouldn't be able to have the mahus of bina. The essence of what bina is impossible without chachma, because you cannot bring something into your mind and make it part of your mind if you don't first see it and realize that it's there.
It has nothing to work with.
Right? It has nothing to work with. So even though I have bina that sometimes seems to work on its own, right? That has nothing to do, because there cannot be bina without chachma. So to ava without das, right? Or machshava without ava, right? Or yira. It's the same thing. Right? Even though sometimes I seem to have machshava without ava or yira, the essence of what machshava is ava or yira. There is no machshava without ava or yira. I might not be able to see it, it might not be obvious, right? But that's what the thing is. So since we've created a chain of things that are, right? Now it's a discrete chain. It's a chain of yesh ma'ayins. So it's not obvious the way that they chain, but nevertheless, what is each of these things? The thing before it. It's an expression, a lower expression, an education, the lesson taught by the thing that came before it. Therefore, concludes the Alter Rebbe, and this is why this is important for our discussion, really, is because chachma is really the essence of everything that a human being is, right? Chachma is not just the first in order, it's the first in terms of it's the core, right? You can't have a maisa without a machshava, because maisa needs dibur and without chachma, sorry. You can't have an action without a chachma. You can't have a maisa without a chachma, because maisa needs dibur, which needs machshava, which needs ava, which needs das, which needs bina, which needs chachma, right? At essence, all of these things need each other in a row. Therefore, chachma is the highest thing in man, not just the first, right? Why is it the highest? Because it's the most essential, right? Everything else needs chachma, but chachma doesn't necessarily need them, right? Chachma is the beginning of the chain that creates all of these things. And then in the next chapter, we're going to explain how Hashem is infinitely beyond chachma. That's the order of what we're explaining. So let's just finish the chapter here. Last line of the chapter. Everything that we've said here is true in the soul of man and the nefesh of the soul of all the creations. In all of the worlds, above and below. In all of them, chachma is the first and the highest of their life force. And hopefully now we understand what this mysterious line means, right? Chachma is the essence of my life force. I thought eating is the essence of my life force, right? Or any other sorts of, right? Anything else that seems to be the main thing in my life. But we've just explained here how nothing that your soul does can happen without chachma. What is it that gives you your life? What is it that makes you what you are and gives you the ability even to eat, even to do anything, right? Maisa is all the way at the end, right? What gives you the ability to do anything and to be and to act within the world and to be a being which interacts with other beings, right? It all comes from chachma. Chachma is the core of the life of a human being.
But in a way, Malchus is even higher than Chokhmah.
What? There's a lot of things that are higher than Chachma, but that's not what we're talking about. Lots of things are higher than Chachma. That's not what we're talking about, though. We are speaking very specifically. Ratzon is higher than Chachma. Tainug is higher than Chachma. Many things are higher than Chachma, but that's not what we're talking about. We are talking about how we are talking about what's called koiches pnimiyim. We're talking about a specific type of existence, right? In a sense, the things that are above Chachma are really above the person's existence as themselves. That's the short version. Therefore, Chachma is the highest thing in the person as themselves. It's the highest thing in the person's inner experience as they are. In the person's own terms, Chachma is the highest thing. The Chachma is the essence of what we are on our own terms, right? Like we spoke about in the previous chapter, what does the Tzimtzum do? It conceals God's terms and allows things to exist on their own terms, right? How does each of those things exist on their own terms? From Chachma. Chachma is the beginning of how each thing, the Chachma of the thing is how it exists on its own terms. That's right, Chachma ma'ayin timatzeh, right? It emerges from nothingness. It's how the thing as itself emerges from nothingness. The first step after nothingness is Chachma, right? To be continued next week, God willing.